You are listening to WXRWLP Milwaukee on 104.1 FM and on riverwestradio.com everywhere. Now you can also listen by telling your smart speaker to play Riverwest Radio. Support for this program comes from Collectivo Coffee and Troubadour Bakery, makers of artisan breads and scratch-baked goodies. Visitors to Collectivo's Bayview Cafe can look in on Troubadour Bakers as they prepare breads and cafe favorites daily. More info is at collectivocoffee.com. So this is Cinema Fireside, and thanks guys for listening in. If you're listening live, it's a hot evening in Milwaukee, and it was good to stop in the cafe next door to get air conditioning, and it's great to be at the station, great to be with you guys. I hope that everyone is well, and let's see. I'm getting a flurry of information as we do the show, which is going to be quite interesting information, certainly. And hopefully hear from Gabe as well. We'll see. He calls in from Kansas City, and I think it was in this week's New York Times travel section on Sunday. They had a nice shot of 18th Street in Kansas City. I don't know if I've been there, but maybe not. Who knows? But it certainly would be nice to check out. So we got to go to the party for the Flesh Trade, and that was Friday night. It was interesting because normally there'd be no going out at 10 o'clock to any venue whatsoever. And this was down on the south side on Kinnickinnick at Frank's Power Plant. So there, was a certain strategy to stay awake, get a little bit of rest, and so on and so forth. And went through the conduits of Milwaukee and parked right in front of Frank's Power Plant. But we were there early, and to get exercise and enjoy the evening, walked up to the Alchemist Theater where the play had just finished, and there was people milling about, including the director and some actors. So 5 of us sat there and relaxed, and then I drove with the director back down to Frank's Power Plant, and probably the first time I was there. And there was a room for the music, and there was a room for the bar, and at the far end of the bar was an actor, and he wasn't one to consume energy where he needed to be constantly entertained and stuff like that. So it was really nice to... Oh, was... Okay. Hey, Jason. You going to be around for a while, my man? Okay, hold on a second, because I'm trying to figure out who's on that other line right now. Yeah. Maybe we got my man on the phone, on the other phone line. We'll see. Oh, did Gabe call in?
Hang up.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Okay. So you're getting some live behind-the-scenes action here. It's off, my man. Okay. So, yeah, Gabe is checking in, and the playwright, Jason Hart, just walked through. I said I may need his assistance if Gabe doesn't call in, but I think Gabe has. So anyway, I was at the end of the bar talking to this one actor because it's all mellow. He doesn't demand energy. That's crazy when you have to listen a mile a minute or try to talk a mile a minute. It's like, arbitrary BS, and it's like, oh man, I'm just not into this. So he was like someone you could just hang tight with, and you didn't have to, oh my gosh, that kind of stuff. So then we ended up driving home together too, because we both live way on the other side of town. So excellent. Thanks for calling in, Gabe. So that was cool. So we didn't see actually the main band at 11. I was like falling out, man. There were just too many restless nights. And so he said, hey, no, man, I'll just ride with you. So that's cool. And that's how we, all good. So you get to, engage in events without losing sleep. Absolutely. So Gabe, I am going to get you on in a few minutes here, and I did see some films because I just started getting back into it, and one of them was Mark Felt. He was revealed to be Deep Throat. One was The Swimmer, based on the John Cheever short story. I've read many of his stories, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 32 and 41, and Romeo and Juliet from 96 from Buzz Luhrmann, who also did The Great Gatsby. As a cultural artifact, I don't know the dates here. I don't know if I already talked about The Swimmer. Maybe no, we didn't, because that was on Tuesday. Yeah, The Swimmer. If you want to see like a modernist piece of cinema, that means like that kind of like that Mad Men era, and be exposed to some truly jaw-dropping scenes of that era. Check out The Swimmer. I think it's from '67 and stars Burt Lancaster. And it is a transitional time for Hollywood because that film is of the old Hollywood system, and that's also the year that The Graduate comes out, and the youth revolution starts happening in Hollywood, and it's kind of the end of that studio picture mentality, but this is still riding that crest. So if you really want to get a cultural injection of modernist. I'm maybe misleading you by saying modernist. It is the modern era, though. From World War II, post World War II up into the '70s sometime, and then you have postmodernism. Someone would know better, but they can articulate it with a greater strategy and greater understanding of it. But anyway, so yeah, if you really want that culture shock, go check out The Swimmer. It's not a great film, but it's definitely a film of interest. Also with Mark Felt, was astounding how many expositional scenes they have. You always cringe when someone says, "Now, how long have we been working together for?" And it's like, man, there's probably a better way to articulate that information in a far more subtle way than blatant exposition. And Mark Felt has several scenes of blatant exposition. Not only that, it has it dances with primordial cliche as well, and you're thinking, wow. What's good about that, though, in screenplay terms, is that you actually get to see primitive states of the screenplay template, whereas more sophisticated films have put a patina of sophistication over the information that needs to be articulated, whereas in more primordial films, it's basically on the nose when they speak, and that makes one cringe, certainly. So films, not only do they have various tones, they have various echelons of articulation, whether it's, again, primitive to sophisticated. So that's always interesting to get a grasp on that. And that's it. So each film serves a purpose, and I think that to watch, where it takes your professional life into new regions to consider, or to saturate yourself with good regions, and you try to stay away from the mediocre for sure. And Buzz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet was a film of its time. He even went on to do a more hyper-accelerated rendition of adaptation, which was The Great Gatsby. But again, these are films of their time. They're very gaudy. They're very colorful. They're very voluptuous in their intent. And when the decades wear on and technology finds new continents to drift around, these films can again look of their time. So, but which is always culturally interesting as well. So, all right, Gabe, I'm looking at an analog clock, and I am going to put you on there. And so get ready, Freddie. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, Mark. Excellent stuff.
Good.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation about Baz Luhrmann I had two conversations actually with two different coworkers, one of whom really has a thing for the 96 Romeo and Juliet, and another person who really is turned off by Luhrmann's work because it's so of its time. It's so it's this hyper frenetic, flashy, technology ridden, special effects of the moment, sort of post MTV decadence, and his movies are like really well made music videos, extended music videos that have these narratives that go longer than 3 minutes, and they're hyper frenetic, they're hyper paced, they're hyper modulated, they're sort of keyed into stories that are of older eras, these sort of timeless romances, but he sort of keys them up into this hyper freneticism, using ultra flashy visuals, using like just tons of like sort of credits and titles techniques, and then just extends them throughout the whole film, uses lots of gimmicks, and I would say that if his films were shorter, I would say he almost ventures into experimental narrative, but because so much of the ultimate payoff of the film and so much of the third act remains using the same exact technique that he uses in the first third, it just becomes a means for him to make his films look more interesting than they really are. It's very similar to Guy Ritchie, who is very much liked by the amateur cinephile, and his films are very fun. They're very visually and aesthetically involving, but there's not much talent at work there. There's not much sophistication, and there's not much in the way of actual story. There's plenty of plot, and there's plenty of characters, but there isn't much actual character to the whole film as a whole. And Baz Luhrmann and Guy Ritchie, I would say, and they fall into the categorization of, I would say, like sophisticated Michael Bay, where they use the technique of editing. They haven't really mastered the technique of editing. There's no coherence. There's very little subtlety. There's definitely no restraint. Whereas I think someone like other visual stylists or other aesthetic masters, where their work is very much resonating within the visuals or the visual nature, the visual language of the film, people like David Lynch, David Cronenberg, Paul Verhoeven, whose films are very much sensual, over-the-top, extremist works, but where they actually have images and ideas that are startling and disturbing. And sometimes the display of that, whether it's editing or cinematography or the media of displaying the message, is also just as frenetic or just as experimental. Stanley Kubrick would be another one. But it's ultimately the dreamlike idea. It's the archetype. It's the actual thought that's as interesting as the delivery system. Whereas directors like Baz Luhrmann and Michael Bay and Guy Ritchie, it's just all delivery. It's just constant modes of fast, quick. And what's disturbing about about those techniques being looked at as being intelligent or as being sophisticated is that it's a primer for something that can lead to an intelligent film, but it's not quite there. At best, it's a film that's trying to replicate things that were hinted at or fringed upon in Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino's first major motion picture. But you see how he cleans up those loose ends or those split ends or those sort of half-empty ideas. Reservoir Dogs is a fine film. It has a lot of nice scenes. It has a lot of nice ideas. But ultimately, it's his most open-end. It's his least interesting film because he's still figuring things out. And there's just a lot of almost there ideas or almost completed errands that the film goes off on. And ultimately, it just isn't quite sophisticated or lived in enough because it's trying to be a worn-in film, but it still feels green. And whatever happened between the time that he made that and Pulp Fiction, there's just a completely different filmmaker at work there. Whereas with Guy Ritchie, I feel like I'm watching the same filmmaker, whether it was a film made 20 years ago or 5 years ago. I don't feel like there's anything that's grown or mastered or changed or gotten more sophisticated over those years. I'd say with Baz Luhrmann, if anything, he gets worse as time goes on, because I think he reached his nexus early on, and I think he's just wearing those techniques thin.
And I have to ask you this, dude. Then what can you tell us about Baz Luhrmann's formative years, his early career, and what has he done?
Well, he did Romeo. I'm trying to think of. I know that he has another film, but the three that come to mind immediately are Romeo and Juliet, which is probably, in many regards, his best film, even though Leonardo DiCaprio was far too young for that. He was not trained nearly enough as an actor, much less a Shakespearean actor, to be comfortable in that role. Claire Danes was very comfortable in that role. She was ready for that. I mean, she was a valedictorian. She went to an Ivy League school. She does have a genius IQ, which means nothing, but she's a very intelligent, very smart, very adept person, and it comes through in her performances. And you see that as a visual tactician, Luhrmann is interested in sensual and obvious techniques and obvious visual cues. And Romeo and Juliet has so much more going on in it as a play and as any film adaptation. You can, by stripping it down to its bare essentials, you can actually find more from it, I think, more than less. He adds to the fringes, to the sides. He adds it with all this ornate and all these pretty elements, which really are meaningless when it comes down to the fact that watching a high school production, I think, is more interesting than watching that film. His version of The Great Gatsby, while visually very interesting, there's some very, very interesting moments in that film, and there's some weird choices that he makes for a mainstream Hollywood movie. And there's just a lot. There's just a smorgasbord of culture that's all put together. The Jay-Z soundtrack, the canted angles, his use of certain his shots are just unusual. He just doesn't go by a normal shooting palette, and it's just always disarming. It's involving. For me, it's a little bit off-putting, even though I'm always strategically paying attention to the choices he's making or the choices that his editor is making. But I'm always so acutely aware of what he's doing as a technician that I'm never able to fully immerse myself into his films. I'm always aware that he's making loud and large asides. He's always making his mark on something that's already a done deal in the zeitgeist and in culture. Great Gatsby is a done deal. As a book, read it numerous times. As a film, I've seen it numerous times. Made for TV production, mainstream Hollywood production. Nothing new is happening here, but he does have some interesting choices. I don't think that they always pay off. In fact, more often than not, they're just annoying because he's playing with something that is so perfect in its original inception that to make asides or to stray from that original narrative or to take chances, I think is just pointless. I just didn't see the point of the film being made. I didn't see the point of even watching the film. But there's moments that were just so acutely original that were just so weirdly thought up, that the fact that he got a major studio to allow him to go off on some of these asides, like letting the main character, I can't remember his name, but the narrator of the film have more extra narration than is originally in the book, having these extra scenes of him writing the actual text of the book with his handwriting. Just lots of special effects that just seemed very unnecessary and just very grandiose and over the top. He definitely is someone who does not hold back, which I guess is worthy of some sort of respect. The fact that I guess he can convince a boardroom full of execs to remake The Great Gatsby and get $100+ million budget, and coerce a bunch of great actors to come together and still make a mediocre film is kind of amazing to me. But like I said, visually, it's interesting enough that I'm still talking about it, even though I didn't care for the film itself. But there are some moments in there that are really good. I mean, he's got Carey Mulligan, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jason Clarke. You've got some great actors in that film, but nothing much Tobey Maguire, but nothing goes above and beyond for me. But Romeo and Juliet really did stick with me. I've seen it twice, and as much as I don't care for a lot of the performances, I feel that there is something really magical about the way that he made that film. There's a danger, there's sort of a looseness, there's seemingly some sort of improvisation that seems to be coming through in some of the scenes, even though it's Shakespeare. I would say that over time that's probably his most interesting film, even though I still don't care for it. I just don't care for that style of filmmaking.
What do you care for?
Mark, I like all sorts of films and all sorts of genres and all sorts of cultures. It just depends. Something just has to click. It has to work. Speaking of Hollywood films, I saw a really good one the other day. I saw the new Mission Impossible, which I've just been reading great review after great review after great review, and I was just getting tired of it because I'm thinking, what more can you do with this franchise? What more can you do with this spy genre, with this espionage, mainstream PG-13 thriller genre? And the smartest decision that the film makes is to not do anything new, but to just execute it better than any other entry in the film. I'd say that the new Mission Impossible outdoes even some of the best James Bond films, which are few and far in between. Mission Impossible 5, which I saw 3 years ago, was such a disappointment and such a letdown. After these extreme highs of Mission Impossible 4, I think it was Ghost Protocol, was just this really astute, just extremely confident and just extraordinarily well-crafted mainstream thriller, which was directed by Brad Bird and had all the lightness and airiness of the best capers and the best thrillers I've ever seen. And was really looking forward to seeing that again. And Mission Impossible 5 was just a huge disappointment on all fronts. It was just all action, all go, and zero involvement and zero believability. I just was never swept in. I was always aware of special effects. I was always aware of when things were too extreme, when things are too... I felt like I was watching a Transporter film. Like I was waiting for Jason Statham to show up. And nothing involved me because everything felt very staged. A lot of the camera work felt like I was watching things that were mounted on a surface. There was no looseness to it. Everything was coordinated. There was way too much comedic sidekick action. Every complaint that I had with Mission Impossible 5 seemed to have been resolved by a boardroom of executive producers. And that's one of the times when I'll actually say that was a smart thing. That Tom Cruise, I think, looked at the fifth entry, probably saw what was wrong, had reservations, but went along with it, and worked with the same director. It's the first time that a director has returned to another entry in the Mission Impossible series. And it really paid off because the things that thematically or that the items that worked in the screenplay in 5 repeat themselves again in 6. You have a complicated plot that forces you to pay attention to the film, that forces you to pay attention to the characters, their motivations, their actions, but not too much. It doesn't over-convolute, but it just keeps things dangerous. It has a sort of spy novel, a good spy novel sophistication, but it doesn't get too webby upon webby upon webby for its own good. There is one like triple cross, but it's well set up, it's well executed. But it's the visual language of this film that I just found so involving. It's just one of the best action films I've seen in years. And it being a PG-13 mainstream action film is even more of a feat, because there's a certain thrill that comes with hard R violence, and there's a certain thrill that comes with being able to execute things a little more extremely, but there is just no punch that they spare in this film. It's well edited, it's well shot, it's constantly on edge. and they keep the cast to a minimum, which was the problem that 5 had, was that there were just too many people. There was too much going on, and they nail it down to a smaller cast, a smaller set of objectives. So you're always aware of exactly what's going on at hand, and there's always a risk. Even though this is a series where you're pretty sure that everyone's going to make it out okay, everything's going to be fine. It's a Hollywood machine. There's a level of involvement, intensity, and danger that was sorely missing from the 5th entry. I was constantly laughing through this film just because the stunts were so good. The action scenes were so well executed. Everything was so precarious. I was never thinking about when is this going to end. I was never thinking about how obvious all of these setups were, how obvious this was all paying off. And even as it goes further and further into this is such a ridiculous Hollywood film, the audience was all laughing in unison at just what a ridiculous Hollywood machine it is, but how well it was working. And there's moments in the film where there seems to be this sort of this candid self-awareness that this is a Hollywood machine. There's even a joke about it going in circles and in circles, about Tom Cruise's character, Ethan Hunt, going in circles on a GPS. And because it's a satellite view, it looks like his character is just running around in a circle, which I thought was one of the funniest lines in a film I've seen in a long time. I was the only person in the theater that laughed, though, which I was a little surprised by because it was such a loud, obvious joke, and I thought it worked really well. There's a lot of scenes where Tom Cruise's character is actually the least energetic person on screen, which is really interesting because normally that's sort of the condition of the Tom Cruise archetype in films, is that he has this sort of charisma and this enduring legacy of that smile, those eyes, that run, that gait. Even though he's only 5'5", 5'4", he's a short guy, maybe 5'6". But I know he's in the lower reaches of the 5 region. He always has this dominating presence. But recently they've been playing against it, where they'll show him being shorter than other guys, or they'll show him being smaller in stature, or they'll show him being sort of winded by a situation or sort of overwhelmed by the odds or the circumstances. And I think that it plays really well, and it's a really smart device because it shows a humanism, and it shows this. It works with Tom Cruise, the action star, Tom Cruise, the movie star, Tom Cruise that we knew in 1983 in Risky Business, and Tom Cruise that we see now 35 years later. There are these moments where he has to stop, where he has to catch his breath, where he looks at the odds that are stacked against him. And we see the 56-year-old Tom Cruise. He looks at the people around him who are looking at him like, are you really going to do that? Can you do that? And he'll look at someone who's standing next to him, who's 20, 30 years younger than him, thin, in really good, in better shape than he is, with less marks on his face, less wear and tear and age. And it shows the wear and tear on his face, and there's sort of there's a lived-in quality, there's a pain, and there's a suffering there, and there's a sort of quasi-Tom Cruise. There's something that isn't just Ethan Hunt, the character. There's something that plays on the larger idea of Tom Cruise, the performer. American Made, which was a film that came out last year about him being a drug smuggler based on a true story, of being the CIA's top guy that was funding cocaine and guns all over the world, worked on that. The tiredness, the raggedness, but also at the same time this unending sort of invincibility. But there also being limits and an end game to that, that there is going to be an end someday. And it's the first film that's ever hinted that this can't go on forever, that this isn't just a series of gag after gag, a series after sequence after sequence after sequence, that eventually he is going to run out of luck, that he is going to run out of time. And a lot of that is unspoken. A lot of it's said with these quiet moments between characters, and a lot of it is inferred. There's sort of this casual sophistication in the storytelling that is, I don't know if it was communicated through the screenplay or if it's something that the director wrote the screenplay, so it's something that he probably instilled from the early drafts of this film. And it works to its credit because there's something, like I said, so convincingly, playfully ludicrous and over the top that's better than any other entry in this franchise. And this is a Hollywood franchise. I'm not going to call these art films. These are films where cars jump over cliffs, where people jump out of airplanes, where, you know, every 10 minutes there's another fight scene. Every 15 minutes there's something involving a timer on a bomb, on some sort of level of double cross where an agent turns out to be working for another conspirator who actually turns out to be working for another government who actually turns out to be a good guy. You know, this is ludicrous entertainment, but I was really enthralled by this entry, and I was really pleased that the type of good reviews that Hollywood films get, I'm very wary of them, because after a while, when there's a certain type of film, like when there's good, well-reviewed Marvel films, I feel hesitant about showing up just because overall this film has gotten 3 or 3.5 out of 4-star reviews, because half the time it's just the same formula, and I'm sick of showing up for the same formula, when just because the formula is executed well doesn't make a good film. Sometimes it's the flaws, sometimes it's the diversion, sometimes it's even things that I guess are annoying to some of these hardened reviewers. But I was really stunned by this like overwhelming praise that Black Panther got, because I think it's just such a boardroom studio made film that, yes, has some good convincing performances, but I just was never lost in that film. I was never swept away. In fact, I felt like I was watching this extremely corporate dot by dot by dot planned out film that, yes, had some cool Afrofuturism in it, but I was never watching a film made by a filmmaker per se. Whereas I feel like this latest Mission Impossible film is a film crafted by a smaller group of people, whether that's Tom Cruise, the producer, which I know he is extremely hands-on and extremely controlling about the films that he produces by Skydance Productions. That may be to his credit or not, but I got the feeling that this was a film that was extremely manicured, and it seemed to pay off very well. So for anyone who likes movies like that, if you're into movies with spies and explosions and you like the Mission Impossible films, the newest entry is not to be skipped. If you're into art cinema, if you're into thoughtful films about characters and motivations and about the complexity of the human condition, you can probably go ahead and skip the latest Mission Impossible film.
But you did enjoy it.
I enjoyed myself so much, it's almost insane. I can't remember the last time I was so thoroughly enthralled and entertained by a film that I saw in the theater. I can't even remember.
You had a good time.
Yeah, well, on like I said, on that Hollywood level, because those movies are operating on amphetamines.
Yeah.
Art films are operating on things like Quaaludes. That's like, it's the long take, it's the slow burn. And documentaries are really what I enjoy watching the most, because there's just the most. Ultimately, it's the film. Those are the type of films that stay with me the longest, that mean the most, and that ultimately have the most payoff from point A to point B. Even really squared and locked in movies that are shot in that real obvious sort of talking head style, I just always am enthralled from the minute, especially if it's a subject that's just captivating and that has some sort of cultural or lasting or political importance. I'm always drawn in, because there's just every conversation, every talking point, every minute, and every piece of archival television footage, it draws into this larger story. And there's different kinds of documentaries. There's documentaries where I have no prior knowledge or involvement or opinion on the subject before I go in. And there's other ones where I have nothing but involvement and nothing but interest in the subject from the minute I walk in, but still get a new perspective from every minute of the film. Movies like De Palma from 2 years ago, which is, about one of the great filmmakers ever. And still, every minute of that film is necessary. Every minute of that film is captivating to me, because every single minute of it is Brian De Palma talking about one of his films. I mean, that's just movie heaven as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't get better than that.
Good, man. What else have you been watching?
I saw Chappaquiddick the other day, which is a really working man's, I would say almost Ron Howarden, well-made, straightforward piece of dramatic procedure, good screenplay, great acting, just a very, it reminded me of the kinds of films that you would see in the 80s and the 90s about a time and a place, of a famous person dealing with a cultural event and shooting it in a very modern, very low budget style, but bringing you into that period and convincing you that you're in that period with costume design, costume, art direction, clothing, just little pieces of memorabilia, uses of television footage, and really just trying to convince you using the small details that you're in that period, and usually successfully doing so. I was impressed. I was immersed. Jason Clarke, who plays Ted Kennedy, and it takes place in 1969 when Ted Kennedy was leaving a party with one of Bobby Kennedy's former secretaries and one of his closest campaign workers. They drove off a bridge. He was drunk, and he lied, and he just made a number of very poor decisions in terms of the way that he dealt with the situation, which really showed cowardice and just a lack of real strong political thinking and will that really was more dominant in the other Kennedys in his family. But it's one of those by-the-numbers political, I wouldn't call it a thriller, but it definitely is a character study. A strong independent film released by a major studio that, left me with really a stronger sense that Jason Clarke really is among our best actors working today. That he can invoke a strong sense of life and sensibility in a film that really doesn't otherwise have a whole lot going for it. The fact that he's the backbone, and I believe it. I'm never unconvinced for 1 minute that he's not Ted Kennedy in the film. I really feel like he did his research, but ultimately that doesn't mean anything until he is the character, and he believes he's the character and then forgets that he's the character. Clarke has this sort of go for it type intensity. He just has this fire in his eyes. He has this nurtured, broken maturity. He has this lived-in quality. And he's never going to be an A-list actor just because he doesn't have that type of beauty. He doesn't have that type of model good looks. He's like he's a really good-looking American construction worker. He has this sort of trust that I guess you can feel it, but he also has the ability to lie. And you would, I guess, be able to understand why he would believe his own lies. He has the ability to play characters that have a lot of flaws, and that also have a lot of altruistic intensity, where, as you were talking about before, about all that exposition, he can play characters that don't require a ton of exposition, but that things can be hinted at, but through simple gesture or through simple reaction or lack of reaction, you can really get a better sense of the emotional contours of his character more than just the implicit layout or blueprints of what has technically happened in the timeline of said character's life. I'm always interested by his performances.
Yeah, I've got the Chappaquiddick book in paperback somewhere in the living room, my man.
Super cool stuff. Yeah,
also Patty Hearst book on the shelf, a hardcover.
Mm-hmm. Cool stuff.
Arbitrary asides, minor, but it's something to season the conversation with.
So I finally got around to watching Tully, which was Jason Reitman's newest film, and I talked about it briefly on the show last week. It's just a really solid return to form. And it's a solid return to form for Charlize Theron. you have all these little subdivisions of interest for people that, Tully has a lot to offer. It's a film about Charlize Theron being an overworked, stay-at-home mom whose husband is sort of an IT guy, travels a lot, doesn't spend a lot of time with his kids. She already has two children, one who's, I think, like 10 and one who's 7. And then they have an unexpected third child that comes, and she's just overworked to the extreme and always feels like she's never getting enough done, like she can't compete with these other super moms that look great and are always one step ahead, and are always thinking of not only their kids, but the whole classroom. And her brother, who is extremely rich and extremely successful, offers to buy her a night nanny, which would mean that it's a nanny that watches your baby and your child at night, so you don't have to get up in the middle of the night and settle your baby and get up to nurse your child and have those multiple hours during the night so you can, sleep more soundly and restfully. Well, she finally decides to do it, and this woman has has this just immediately potent and powerful effect on her psyche, and the change in her sleeping patterns just changes her exuberance, and she just becomes a new person. But she's also really infected by the youthful exuberance that her night nanny gives off. And they have a series of really offhanded, sort of loose, very scripted, but very improvisational feeling and very organic conversations between two women of two slightly different generations, where one is looking back almost on herself and looking at the choices that she made at that time, and looking at this woman in modern times making those same decisions or being on the verge of those same choices, and having those opportunities that she had. And she starts to develop this sort of casual friendship with her, and it's just really refreshing to see a smart adult grown-up film that has a lot to say, that has a lot of involvement, that takes you on this very tight-knit journey, that goes to that explores all of the characters thoroughly, uses them to the fullest of their potential, and just excises everything possible from without going too far, without turning it into this dramatic hodgepodge of a film that exceeds its believability, but also goes into the fantastical at the same time, but doesn't exceed, the grounds of science. Written by Diablo Cody, it's the third pairing between director Jason Reitman and Diablo Cody, the second of which was Young Adult, which was, again, a mature, grown-up film for adults, about adults, which also starred Charlize Theron, which was a little, I would say, actually too dark for its own good and too extreme. It off-put a lot of people. I mean, people saw that and were just like, the general vibe seemed to be, I get it, this is a terrible, horrible human being that does not have any redeeming qualities, which was a trait, which was a criticism of many Noah Baumbach films, but especially the film Greenberg, which I just thought was a delight.
Yeah, I enjoyed that film a lot.
Thank you, Mark, because a film about, extremely broken people with realistic sets of objectives and realistic parameters of behavior. I'm sorry, human beings just are monsters often. We treat each other horribly. We do very questionable things to the people we care about the most. We treat the people that we're in romantic relationships with utter contempt oftentimes. We do just unspeakably terrible things to each other, and then we defend those decisions oftentimes, or we're unable to face what we've really done and the lasting consequences, the unforgivable consequences in many cases of things that we do out of spite or out of ignorance, in just the slightest and the most casual of demeanors, and then stand by it, whether it's out of ego or whether it's out of selfishness or whether it's just out of deterministic oblivion.
How prescient you say that. Thank you.
I just love when a film can show that type of casual that type of casual awfulness. I really dig Noah Baumbach, and that's one thing that I do love about Jason Reitman is that he shows the comedic dark contours of casual suburbia, especially on the liberal angle. I love that he can show people that love to think that they have the best intentions, but are really out to serve number one. Talk about the world, but really are just concerned about number one. Are obsessed with looking worldly and obsessed with looking forward thinking and obsessed with looking the part of being the most unselfish, super caring, global thinking, humanist, activist, philanthropist. But really, when it comes down to it, their behavior, their oblivious behavior is just as awful as anyone else. So Jason Reitman is always that type of filmmaker. He really fell off for a couple of films. I mean, critics were really just making fun of him after a while because Labor Day was just such a bizarre, so poorly conceived, so horribly executed lifetime movie of the week. I don't even know what happened. It's so crazy. It's almost like a Lee Daniels film, except bad. And then I think it was called Your Wives and Children, Your Husband's Wives and Children, which was this, I know I'm messing the title up on that, but that was like a multi-character study that was meant to look at like the connectedness of all things and all people sort of striving to find meaning and the contours of who we are, their identity, and also their place within the relationships in relation to all these other characters, some of the minutia and their place in this web of characters and this web of interconnected comings and goings of people and families and other relations. And it was just a disaster. Jennifer Garner, Adam Sandler. I know that there were probably like 6 or 7 other contemporary, I'd say well-established character actors that were in it, and it just never gelled. It was just laughably bad at its attempt at global connectedness. But he's really bounced back and strong. I was just really impressed with Tully. It emotionally moved me at the end. What was cool was to see that the means by which the contours of the second act of the film, which really takes off into this casually involving developments in the plot and changes in character, they actually turn out to have a sort of, I don't want to say everything is explained in such a realistic manner that it all bounces back, that even though there is a sort of twist to the film, it never feels contrived, it never feels phony, and it never felt vulgar. It's definitely one of the better films I've seen this year so far. And Charlize Theron continues to pull me in as an actress the older she gets. There seems to be something genuinely haunted and something genuinely mysterious about her. And there seems to be some sort of mental health issue, which I know in her public life, outside of her performances on film, she has publicly struggled with depression and other mental health disorders and stuff. And that has nothing to do with my assertion that there's something genuinely dark underneath her eyes, that there's something real there that most actors don't have, and especially actors of her stature. I don't believe that Julia Roberts has a particular level of depth and convincing emotion and convincing hardship in her life. However, when she plays a princess, when she plays someone that's pedestaled, when she plays someone that has a sort of lived-in decency or a type of qualified happiness or some sort of reachable echelon of that middle-class American dream, even though she's one of the richest and most successful actors in the history of Hollywood, I believe the averageness quotient, but I don't believe the hardship quotient. And that hardship quotient is something you either have or you don't. And if you try to fake it, you're gonna fail. It's gonna look terrible. It always strikes me as just, it's like the screen test. There's just something there that you either have or you don't. So it's cool to see Charlize Theron sort of deepen as an actress as she goes along, and it's not something that I can quite pinpoint as to what it is necessarily. But I would say around the time of Mad Max Fury Road in 2015, there was definitely something unspoken that started to come through in her performances that I don't think she had previous to that. So super cool stuff. Atomic Blonde, that's another film that has that quotient of that lived-in, hardened quality, that darkness.
Yeah,
but
I'm glad you mentioned that, Gabe, because I'm looking forward to seeing that. And then
it's
what's
worth
the
it,
one?
Mark.
What's the one that came out around the same time? That's actually, she's a ballerina, I believe, but she's also like a spy, something along those lines.
Oh, that's Red Sparrow.
Thank you, Red Sparrow and Atomic Blonde. Yes. Thank you.
I haven't seen Red Sparrow yet, but I know it's supposed to be really interesting. I shouldn't actually. That's not true. I watched half of it. I still have to finish the other. I'd say I watched less than half, so I don't want to go. I don't want to say that I watched it. I don't want to give it a final review or a final grade. It's very well shot. It's very well-meaning, and it's meant to be a serious, thoughtful film that. But it also has many silly, over-the-top, and I would say almost crazy attributes. The fact that Charlotte Rampling is in it, I think, is no surprise because there are many detours, and there's just these startling, really extreme moments, like just out of nowhere, just sudden left turns, narrative left turns, character left turns, visual left turns. And Rampling has always been an actress who's been able to pull that off. So the fact that they have Jennifer Lawrence in that role, because she's able to do that convincingly. She's the type of actress who can straight-facedly pull off left turns. Silver Linings Playbook was a film that I think showed that off really well, how straightforward her character is, while the inner nature, the emotional nature of that character is just going from left to right to left to right. She convincingly played someone who's not quite all there, someone who's slightly unhinged, but someone that emotionally you can trust, someone that means well, that has the best intentions, but isn't quite on that same standard page that most people would call the straight and narrow. Which that's a hard quality to pull off because it has to just be part of your innate nature. And if you're an actor and if you don't have that, that is something that you really, you just have to be that. You have to go someplace that I don't know as an actor how to go there.
You will, man. Cool. If you're determined, Gabe, you will.
That's very true. Mark, I also briefly talked about Unsane on the show the other week. And I just want to recap on that Steven Soderbergh's latest film, which he shot on an iPhone. Soderbergh and Michael Mann are two filmmakers that I always find inextricably linked. They're always pushing the boundary of low-budget, newest technology as a means of telling their stories the most economically, but they also infuse it with this sort of urban, spry danger that they're shooting it on a medium that you're not going to see other mainstream Hollywood films shot on. And they use it to the best of the ability to sort of bring you into the moment, bring you into the urban contours, because there's a professionalism and there's a neo-noir sophistication of their work that most of their contemporaries don't have. So the fact that they shoot it on these cheaper mediums than most of their contemporaries do, but they actually achieve greater results, there's just something about both of their respective works that achieve a quality. They're just always going forward, also by going backwards. Michael Mann is just really good at what he does. He's always been a master craftsman. Steven Soderbergh is the same thing. He's always pushing, and he's always someone who's contradicting himself, which I just love. He's always saying he's retiring every couple of years. He can't help himself. He comes back. He makes a film, makes 2 films, makes 3 films. Makes a TV series. He just cannot stop. He's a man on fire, and I love that about him. And he's always switching genres. He's always working with new types of stories. You can never expect or nail down what he's going to do or why he's doing it. He just is always trying to keep you in a convincing, level-headed, but totally insane film. Unsane is a unique film in his filmography. I would say that there's parallels to Shock Corridor. There's definitely homages to it at times. Yes, so it's super cool, Mark. I would recommend it for the filmmaking and just for the film itself. It's interesting to watch what he did with shooting it on an iPhone because it looks like a competent low-budget film. But you just see the sidelines of experimental qualities, but still this headstrong, assured, confident filmmaker that's in charge of his craft, in charge of his film. The word B film, the word B film was thrown around in a lot of reviews for the movie, like confident, above average B film. I just think that's ridiculous. It's using the mechanisms of a B film. It's using the outlines of what other filmmakers would have how they would have created a B film in the 1950s or 60s. This is a master filmmaker working in a contained, controlled setting and using older technique, using older narrative devices and coming up with superior results to most films that I see.
Excellent.
Just really fun stuff.
And Gabe, what a way to end the show. Thanks so much for all of that. I appreciate it, my man.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. I appreciate you. I appreciate the show. Appreciate our listeners. It's just another day in the life, and I'm really happy to be able to watch movies and to be able to share them with you and share them with our audience. It's just, Mark, we've been doing this for 6 years, and I'm just really glad that we're
well, you dutifully did your exposition scene. Thank you. So, Gabe, man, I really, really appreciate it, my man. And I want you to have a very, very, very good night.
Mark, you too. We'll see you all back here next week.
Take care, Gabe. Yeah, Gabe, I always appreciate his presence for sure. And we're wrapping things up here. And before we go back into the other regions of our lives and hopefully a little bit of reading can be managed this evening for sure. Let's see about that, and hopefully a good night's sleep, falling asleep to radio dramas. There's so many wonderful, wonderful, wonderful radio dramas out there, and so look forward to that. I hope everyone is well. And also, the power of the mind is really something, and if you really do want to make changes, they are painful, because your mind rejects them. But seriously, if you, whatever it is, whether it's career, diet, or whatever, if you do it every day, you can gradually change the neural connections in your mind. It's like I said, it's a lot of pain at first because the brain is being fed some very unfamiliar territory. It's not comfortable with it. Even though it's good for you, it doesn't matter, because the brain only likes the comfort zone. It only likes what's familiar. Even if it's not good for you, it revels in familiarity. So when you begin to feel psychological pain and angst and all of that stuff, that's a good thing, because and it's going to take a while. You might have to do it for hundreds of hours, thousands of times, but that's just the way you got to do it. We will be on at the same time next week on WXR WLP 104.1 FM Milwaukee. To hear past episodes, visit riverwestradio.com/shows and click Cinema Fireside.